If your blood sugar is higher in the morning than it was when you went to bed and you didn't eat a single thing overnight, I need you to stop and really sit with that for a second. You fasted for 8, 9, maybe 10 hours. You didn't touch food. You didn't snack. You followed the rules, and yet your number went up. That doesn't make sense on the surface. And if you've been staring at that number, replaying your dinner in your head, wondering what you did wrong, I want to tell you something right now before we go any further. You probably didn't do anything wrong. Because what's driving your morning blood sugar is often not your evening meal. There is a hidden biological process running inside your body every single night, a process that most advice completely ignores. And that process has a direct impact on what you see when you test yourself first thing in the morning. My name is Dr. Megan Foster, and I've spent over 2 decades working in metabolic health. I've sat across from hundreds of patients, people who were meticulous about what they ate, people who tracked everything, people who did everything by the book and still felt like they were failing every single morning. And the conversation almost always started the same way. I ate a good dinner, I went to bed, I woke up, and my number was higher than it was the night before. What did I do wrong? And here's what I tell every single one of them. The reason you feel stuck is because you're solving the wrong problem. Not because you're not smart, not because you're not trying hard enough, but because the information most people are given about morning blood sugar is incomplete. It focuses almost entirely on what you ate. And sometimes, more often than people realize, food has very little to do with it. Today, I'm going to walk you through what's actually happening inside your body while you sleep. I'm going to explain the specific biological process behind elevated morning blood sugar, why it happens, how common it is, why it's so often misunderstood, and what you can actually do about it. Not vague lifestyle tips, specific practical grounded approaches that target the right system at the right time. Because when you finally understand what's driving the pattern, the path forward becomes so much clearer. And that clarity changes everything. Let's start from the beginning, from the biology, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Your body is not a simple machine that sits quietly overnight, waiting for you to wake up and eat breakfast. It is constantly working, constantly regulating, adjusting, preparing. And one of the most important things it does during the overnight hours happens in a very specific window, usually somewhere between 2 and 5 in the morning, while you are completely asleep and have no awareness of it at all. During this window, your body begins preparing you to wake up. Think about what waking up actually requires from a biological standpoint. You're going from a resting, inactive state to an alert, active one. Your brain needs to fire up. Your muscles need to be ready to engage. Your cardiovascular system needs to shift gears. Your entire body needs fuel to support that transition. And your body doesn't wait for you to eat breakfast before it starts that process. It prepares the fuel supply in advance on its own schedule while you're still asleep. How does it do that? It sends a signal to your liver to start releasing stored sugar into your bloodstream. Your liver is one of the most underappreciated organs when it comes to blood sugar management. Most people think about the pancreas when they think about blood sugar, and the pancreas is certainly important. But the liver is equally central to this story, especially when it comes to what happens overnight. Throughout the day, your liver stores energy in the form of something called glycogen. Think of glycogen as a packed-away fuel reserve. And then in the early morning hours, your liver receives hormonal signals, a kind of biological alarm calling it to open the gates and start releasing that stored energy as glucose into your bloodstream. This process is called hepatic glucose production. It is completely normal. It is supposed to happen in a well-regulated metabolic system. The liver releases a measured appropriate amount of glucose. The pancreas responds by producing insulin. Your cells respond to that insulin and absorb the glucose efficiently, and blood sugar stays in a balanced, healthy range. You wake up, your body is fueled and ready, and the whole thing runs like it was designed to because it was. But here is where the problem develops for a very large portion of people. When insulin resistance is present, and I want to be clear that this exists on a spectrum, and you do not have to have a formal diagnosis for this to be affecting you, the system doesn't respond the way it should. The liver still releases glucose. That part happens normally, but the body's ability to clear that glucose, to pull it out of the bloodstream and into cells where it can be used, is impaired. The mechanism that should balance the system isn't working as efficiently as it needs to. So instead of a modest rise in blood sugar followed by a quick, clean return to a healthy baseline, you get a more significant rise, and it lingers. And by the time your alarm goes off and you test your blood sugar, you're not seeing a reflection of your dinner. You're seeing the result of your liver's overnight activity combined with your body's reduced capacity to respond to that activity. This is called the dawn phenomenon. And I want to emphasize this as clearly as I possibly can. The dawn phenomenon is not caused by what you ate the night before. It is a function of your liver's glucose production and your body's ability to respond to insulin during the overnight fasting window. These are completely separate variables from the ones most people are focused on when they try to manage their morning numbers. And that is exactly why focusing only on food so often fails to move the needle. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. If this is such a well-known phenomenon, why hasn't anyone ever explained it to me this clearly? Why is so much of the advice still just about eating less and cutting carbs? Honestly, because telling people to change their eating habits is simpler and easier to communicate than explaining hepatic glucose production and overnight insulin sensitivity. And because the medical system often doesn't have enough time in a short appointment to get into the depth of this, you get a sheet of paper with general dietary guidelines, a recommendation to exercise more, and a follow-up appointment scheduled for 6 months from now. That's not anyone's fault. It's a limitation of the system, but it means a lot of people are walking around with an incomplete picture of their own biology, and that incomplete picture is costing them. So, let's talk about how common this actually is. Research estimates that somewhere between 30 and 50% of people with type 2 diabetes experience a clinically meaningful dawn phenomenon. That is nearly half. Nearly half of the people testing their blood sugar every morning, logging their numbers, feeling confused and frustrated when the reading doesn't match their effort, are dealing with a process that has nothing to do with what they had for dinner. That mismatch between the amount of effort people are putting in and the results they're seeing on the meter is where so much of the discouragement comes from. And it's not a failure of discipline or willpower, it's a failure of information. When you're working on the wrong problem, even the right effort gets wasted. Let me acknowledge something about the emotional dimension of this, because I think it matters, and I don't think it gets talked about enough in medical conversations. Living with elevated blood sugar is not just a physical experience, it carries real emotional weight. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being hypervigilant every single day, tracking every meal, analyzing every number, trying to piece together connections that sometimes just don't connect and still not feeling like you're making progress. That exhaustion compounds over time. It creates a kind of chronic stress that, as we'll discuss, actually makes the underlying problem worse. And when people feel like they've done everything right and the morning number still doesn't reflect that effort, the default is almost universally self-blame. There must be something wrong with me specifically. My body is uniquely broken. I'm missing something obvious that everyone else seems to understand. I'm not trying hard enough. I want to offer a different frame, one that is both more accurate and more compassionate. Maybe you've been working very hard on one part of a multi-art problem. And now that you understand the other part, the part that operates while you sleep, the part that has nothing to do with willpower, you finally have somewhere new to look. Somewhere where the effort you've already been putting in can actually start to pay off. That is not a small thing. Now let's get practical. I'm going to walk you through 3 specific areas of focus for supporting your body during the overnight window. I want you to think of these as layers. Each one builds on the foundation of the one before it, and by the time we get to the third one, you'll understand exactly why it's different from what most people have tried. The first area is your evening meal. And I want to frame this carefully because after just telling you that morning blood sugar isn't about food, it might seem contradictory to talk about dinner. But here is the nuance. Your dinner doesn't cause the dawn phenomenon, but it absolutely can influence how pronounced it becomes. The signal your last meal sends to your liver has consequences for what happens in the hours that follow. And the mistake most people make with their evening meal is focusing on restriction rather than stability. Those two things feel similar, but they produce very different biological outcomes. Here's what I mean. When you eat a meal that causes a large, fast spike in blood sugar followed by a rapid drop, that pattern sends a specific signal to your body's regulatory systems. The sharp spike triggers a strong insulin response. The crash that follows elevates stress hormones slightly. The overall message being received by your liver is instability, unpredictability. Things got chaotic. Be prepared for anything. And one of the ways the liver responds to that perceived instability is by ramping up its overnight glucose production. Not because it's malfunctioning, but because it's responding to a signal that something might be wrong. It's being overcautious. It's releasing more glucose than you actually need as a protective measure. And the result is that when you wake up, the reading reflects that overcorrection. A meal that produces a gradual, gentle rise followed by a slow, smooth return to baseline sends an entirely different message. Stability, control, no emergency. Under these conditions, the liver's overnight output tends to be more moderate. The starting conditions for the overnight window are better, and your morning number has a better chance of reflecting that. So, what does a stabilizing evening meal look like in real practical terms? It's built around protein. Protein slows digestion overall. Digestion. It moderates how quickly glucose from other parts of the meal enters your bloodstream. It keeps you full and satisfied, which reduces the likelihood of snacking later, which itself can disrupt the overnight picture. The specific source of protein matters less than having it as a meaningful component of the meal. Chicken, fish, eggs, legumes, tofu, any of these work. It includes fiber, vegetables, leafy greens, beans, lentils, whole grains, and reasonable portions. Fiber acts as a natural buffer. It slows the rate at which glucose is absorbed from your food into your blood. A high-fiber meal produces a smoother, more gradual glucose curve than a low-fiber one. That smoothness is exactly what you're after in the evening when your body's processing capacity is naturally a bit lower, and it limits the things that create fast, dramatic spikes. Sweetened drinks, large portions of refined carbohydrates, desserts eaten late, fruit juices. Not because these are inherently terrible foods, but because their effect in the evening is particularly disruptive given the timing. Here's the part that genuinely surprises most people. Skipping dinner or eating very little is not a helpful strategy for managing overnight blood sugar. In fact, for many people, it makes things significantly worse. When your body senses that it hasn't received adequate fuel from a meal, it interprets that as a potential deficit. And one of its responses to perceived deficit is to become more aggressive with overnight glucose release, releasing more than it otherwise would to make sure you don't end up with dangerously low blood sugar while you sleep. So you go to bed with a relatively low blood sugar from your minimal dinner, and you wake up with a surprisingly elevated reading because your liver overcompensated. The goal is not to eat less. The goal is to eat stably, and that is a fundamentally different approach that actually feels better to live by because it means you don't have to be hungry at night. The second area is timing. This is one of the most underappreciated variables in blood heat-specific mechanisms. The practical strategies laid out step by step in a format you can reference. I've put one together and it's linked in the description below. It's designed to be something you come back to, not just something you read once. Your body is not broken. It is following a pattern. And patterns, once you understand them, can be changed. That's what I'm here for. And I will see you in the next one.